The morning frost clung to the wooden fence posts like tiny diamonds, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the crisp Montana air. It was October 15th, 2019, and I was standing in the same spot where I'd stood every morning for the past 3 years, holding a steaming cup of coffee and watching thunder emerge from the old red barn. But this morning felt different somehow, heavier, like the universe was holding its breath. Thunder wasn't just any horse. Standing 17 hands high with a coat the color of dark chocolate and a white blaze running down his face like lightning frozen in time, he commanded attention wherever he went. But it wasn't his impressive size or striking appearance that made him special. It was his eyes. Deep, intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. Eyes that had seen me at my worst and somehow still chose to trust me. I remember the first time I laid eyes on him. It was 3 years earlier, at the Billings County Animal Rescue, where I'd gone reluctantly after my divorce. My ex-wife Sarah had taken everything: the house in Denver, most of our savings, and what felt like the better part of my spirit. At 42 years old, I found myself starting over in a small Montana town called Cedar Ridge, population 847, working as a veterinarian for the local ranch community. "This one's been here for 8 months, Janet, the rescue coordinator, had told me that day, gesturing toward Thunder's stall. "Previous owner couldn't handle him after an accident. Says he's too unpredictable, too strong-willed. But I've been watching him, and I think he's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" I'd asked, approaching the stall cautiously. "For someone who understands that strength isn't always about being gentle, and gentleness isn't always about being weak." Thunder had stood perfectly still as I extended my hand toward the metal bars of his stall. No pawing at the ground, no aggressive posturing, just calm observation. When my palm finally touched his nose, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Like coming home to a place you'd never been before. The adoption paperwork was signed that afternoon. Now, watching him emerge from the barn in that crystalline October morning, I marveled at how much had changed. Thunder had become more than a companion. He'd become my anchor in a world that had felt increasingly unstable. The small ranch I'd managed to lease on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge had become our sanctuary. 40 acres of rolling grassland bordered by pine forests, with the Rocky Mountains painting the horizon in shades of purple and gold. "Morning, old friend," I called out, setting my coffee cup on the fence post. Thunder's ears perked forward, and he approached with that characteristic grace that still amazed me. For such a powerful animal, he moved like poetry in motion. As I ran my hand along his neck, I could feel the warmth of his body cutting through the morning chill. This daily ritual had become sacred to us both. 15 minutes before the demands of the day took over, when it was just Thunder and me in the vast Montana sky, he would press his massive head against my chest, and I would breathe in that distinctive horse scent, a mixture of hay, leather, and something indefinably wild that spoke to a part of my soul I'd thought was permanently broken. "Dr. Mitchell?" The voice came from behind me, startling us both. I turned to see Tommy Henderson, barely 16, with his cowboy hat askew and his boots covered in mud. Tommy worked part-time at the Fletcher Ranch about 5 miles east, and his appearance at my place before 7 in the morning meant only one thing: trouble. "What's wrong, Tommy?" I asked, though Thunder had already sensed the boy's anxiety. The horse's posture had shifted subtly, ears rotating like radar dishes, muscles tensing beneath his coat. "It's the Hendersons' place, sir, and the Kowalskis. Something's been getting to the livestock." Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "Started about a week ago. Found 3 sheep torn up pretty bad at our place yesterday. My dad thinks it might be wolves, but..." He trailed off, looking uncertain. I'd heard rumors around town about increased wildlife activity in the area. Climate change had pushed predator populations further into human territory, and the unusually harsh winter the year before had left many animals desperate and hungry. But wolves hadn't been seen in this part of Montana for decades. "But what, Tommy?" "Well, sir, wolves usually take what they need and move on. This is different. It's like whatever's doing this is just angry. Really angry." Thunder snorted and took a step closer to me, and I found my hand automatically moving to stroke his neck. In the 3 years we'd been together, I'd learned to trust his instincts. If Thunder was concerned, there was definitely something to be concerned about. "Tell your father I'll drive out this afternoon to take a look," I said. "And Tommy, tell everyone to keep their animals close to the houses after dark. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." As Tommy drove away in his battered pickup truck, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the still morning air, I looked back at Thunder. He was staring toward the tree line that bordered our property, his entire body alert in a way I'd rarely seen. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze. The pine forest stood silent and seemingly empty, but I'd learned not to doubt Thunder's perceptions. Horses could sense things humans missed: changes in air pressure, subtle sounds, the presence of predators still miles away. That afternoon, as promised, I drove to the Henderson Ranch with Thunder loaded in the trailer behind my truck. I'd learned early in our relationship that Thunder was not just my companion, but also my partner in work. His presence had a calming effect on other animals, and his keen senses often picked up on health issues before I could identify them clinically. The scene at the Henderson place was worse than Tommy had described. 3 sheep lay scattered across the pasture, and the wounds were unlike anything I'd seen from typical predator attacks. These were precise, almost surgical in their brutality. Whatever had done this possessed both intelligence and rage, a combination that sent cold fingers of dread down my spine. "Doc, I've been ranching in these parts for 37 years, said Bill Henderson, a weathered man in his 60s with hands like leather and eyes that had seen too much. "Never seen anything like this. It's like something just wanted to hurt them, not feed." Thunder remained unusually alert during our examination of the scene, occasionally snorting and pawing at the ground. When we prepared to leave, he was reluctant to load back into the trailer, turning repeatedly to stare at the forest line. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in our small corner of the world. Cedar Ridge had always been a place where people looked out for each other, where children could play outside until well after dark, where the biggest concerns were crop prices and high school football scores. But as I stood at my kitchen window, watching Thunder pace restlessly in the moonlit pasture, I realized that sense of security might have been more fragile than any of us had imagined. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. It was Sheriff Patricia Knowles, a tough woman in her 50s who'd kept peace in our county for over 2 decades. "Doc, I need you to come out to the Kowalski place. Bring Thunder if you think he can help. We've got a situation here that's got me more worried than I care to admit." I didn't need to ask for details. The tension in Patricia's voice told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had attacked the Henderson livestock had struck again, and this time it was worse. As I loaded Thunder into the trailer once more, I caught myself wondering if this was the beginning of something that would test not just our small community, but the bond between Thunder and me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The horse seemed to sense my thoughts, nuzzling my shoulder as if to say, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Little did I know that the events of that October night would set in motion a chain of circumstances that would transform Thunder from my beloved companion into something far greater, a legend born from courage, sacrifice, and a love that transcended the boundaries between species. The Kowalski Ranch looked like a battlefield under the harsh glare of the portable floodlights Sheriff Knowles had set up. As Thunder and I approached the scene, I could feel his tension radiating through the lead rope. His nostrils flared as he took in scents that clearly alarmed him, and his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by an alertness so intense it was almost electric. "Jesus, Doc," Patricia said, approaching us with her characteristic no-nonsense stride. "I've seen car accidents, hunting mishaps, bar fights that turned ugly. But this," she gestured toward the pasture where the Kowalski's small herd of cattle had been scattered like broken toys. 5 head of cattle lay dead, but it was the precision of the carnage that made my stomach turn. These weren't the chaotic, desperate attacks of hungry predators. The wounds were strategic, targeted. Whatever had done this understood anatomy well enough to know exactly where to strike for maximum damage. "Where are Stan and Marie?" I asked, referring to the elderly Polish couple who'd run this small ranch for over 40 years. "Sent them to stay with their daughter in town." Stan wanted to stay and fight, but Patricia's voice trailed off as she watched Thunder carefully examining the perimeter of the attack zone. His behavior unlike anything I'd seen before. Thunder was working the scene like a trained investigator, moving in a precise pattern around the carnage. His head was low, nostrils working constantly, occasionally stopping to paw at specific spots on the ground. I'd seen him track before. Horses have an incredible sense of smell, but this was different. This was deliberate, methodical. "Dr. Mitchell?" The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist from the state university whom I'd met at a few veterinary conferences. Her presence here meant the state was taking this seriously. "Sarah, what brings you out here?" "Got a call from Fish and Wildlife. They're concerned about the pattern of attacks." She pulled out a tablet and showed me a digital map dotted with red markers. 13 confirmed incidents across 4 counties in the past 2 weeks. all following a roughly circular pattern with Cedar Ridge at the center. The map made my blood run cold. Whatever was responsible for these attacks wasn't randomly wandering. It was systematically working its way inward, like a noose slowly tightening around our community. Any idea what we're dealing with? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Working theory is a pack of hybrid wolves, part wolf, part large domestic dog. They're bigger, smarter, and more aggressive than pure wolves. Climate change has disrupted traditional migration patterns, and we think this pack was displaced from their territory further north. Thunder suddenly lifted his head sharply, staring toward the tree line about 200 yards away. His entire body went rigid, and a low rumble started deep in his chest. Not quite a whinny, but something I'd never heard him make before. "What is it, boy?" I moved to his side, placing my hand on his neck. His muscles were coiled like springs, and I could feel his heart racing beneath my palm. That's when I saw them. Eyes. 4 pairs of eyes reflecting the floodlights from the darkness between the pine trees. Too high off the ground to be normal wolves. Too steady and intelligent to be ordinary predators. They watched us with an intensity that felt almost personal, as if they were studying us, learning our weaknesses. "Patricia," I called quietly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. "You might want to see this." The sheriff followed my gaze and immediately reached for her radio. "All units, we have eyes on 4 unidentified animals at the Kowalski scene. Large canines approximately 200 yards northeast of the main house." For several long minutes we engaged in a silent standoff. The creatures in the tree line remained perfectly still, and Thunder never relaxed his defensive posture. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the eyes vanished into the darkness. "Jesus Christ," Patricia muttered. "Did you see the size of those things?" I had. Even accounting for the distance and shadows, the animals we'd just observed were enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf I'd ever seen, with intelligent, calculating gazes that suggested a level of consciousness that went beyond basic predatory instinct. Thunder remained on high alert for another 20 minutes, long after the rest of us had convinced ourselves the immediate danger had passed. Only when he finally relaxed did I realize how much I'd come to trust his judgment. If Thunder said it was safe, it was safe. If Thunder said there was danger, there was danger. The drive home was tense and quiet. Thunder seemed troubled, occasionally shifting restlessly in the trailer despite his usual calm during transport. When we arrived back at our ranch, he immediately went to the fence line facing the forest and began what I could only describe as a patrol, walking the perimeter with purpose, stopping occasionally to stare into the darkness. That night, I made a decision that probably saved both our lives. Instead of putting Thunder in the barn as usual, I left him in the pasture closest to the house and set up a cot on the covered porch where I could keep watch. It felt slightly ridiculous. A 45-year-old veterinarian camping out on his own porch because his horse seemed nervous. But 3 years of partnership had taught me to trust Thunder's instincts over my own rational doubts. At 3:17 a.m., Thunder's sharp whinny jolted me awake. He was standing at the fence, body language screaming alarm, staring toward the barn. In the pale moonlight, I could make out shadows moving with purpose around the structure. Shadows too large and too coordinated to be anything natural. I reached for my phone to call Patricia, but before I could dial, Thunder made a decision that changed everything. Instead of backing away from the fence toward the safety of the house, he began moving toward the gate that led to the barn pasture. Not running, not panicking, but advancing with deliberate, controlled steps. "Thunder, no," I whispered, slipping off the porch as quietly as possible. But he wasn't acting out of fear or confusion. This was calculated, protective behavior. He was placing himself between our home and whatever was out there in the darkness. The shadows around the barn had grown bolder, and in the moonlight I could now see them clearly. 4 massive creatures, each one easily the size of a large German shepherd, but built with the lean, powerful frame of a wolf. Their movements were coordinated, intelligent. They were testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. Thunder had positioned himself in the center of the pasture, directly between the predators and the house. His head was high, ears forward, presenting himself as the primary obstacle to whatever they intended. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, horse and wolves regarded each other across the moonlit grass. Then the largest of the 4 creatures, a massive animal with silver-gray fur that seemed to shimmer in the pale light, took a step forward. It was a challenge, a test of Thunder's resolve. Thunder's response was immediate and unmistakable. He reared up on his hind legs, all 17 hands and 1,200 pounds of him, silhouetted against the Montana sky like some ancient warrior from a forgotten battle. When his front hooves hit the ground, the impact echoed across the pasture like thunder, which I realized in that moment was probably how he'd gotten his name at the rescue. The message was clear. You want to get to that house? You'll have to go through me. The wolves seemed to consider this proposition for several long moments. Then, one by one, they melted back into the forest, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wild places and the absolute certainty that they would be back. As I stood there in my pajamas watching my horse patrol the pasture in the aftermath of a confrontation I barely understood, I realized that something had fundamentally changed in our relationship. Thunder wasn't just my companion anymore. He was my protector, my guardian, my partner in a conflict that was only beginning. But what I couldn't have imagined that night was how far Thunder would be willing to go to honor that partnership, or how high the price of his protection would ultimately be. The emergency town meeting was called for the following evening at Cedar Ridge High School's gymnasium. Word had spread quickly through our small community, the kind of wildfire communication that only happens when people are genuinely afraid. As Thunder and I drove into town, his trailer rattling behind my pickup truck, I could see the parking lot was already full despite being 30 minutes early. I'd made the decision to bring Thunder partly for practical reasons. I didn't want to leave him alone at the ranch, but mostly because his presence the night before had quite literally saved our lives. In the past 24 hours, I'd come to understand that Thunder wasn't just unusually intelligent for a horse. He seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense and respond to danger. Dr. Mitchell. The voice belonged to Margaret Walsh, the elderly librarian who'd become something of an unofficial town historian. At 73, she moved with the determined pace of someone who'd seen enough change in her lifetime to know when something truly significant was happening. Thank goodness you're here. People are scared and they're looking for answers. As we entered the gymnasium, I was struck by the tension in the air. Cedar Ridge was the kind of community where people left their doors unlocked and children rode their bikes to school. Now families were clustered together in tight groups, speaking in hushed tones, and I noticed more than a few people carrying firearms openly, something that would have been unthinkable at a school function just a week ago. Sheriff Knowles stood at a makeshift podium, flanked by Dr. Chen and a man I didn't recognize. Tall, weathered, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. As the room gradually quieted, Patricia began what would become one of the most important meetings in our town's history. I know you're all scared, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the packed gymnasium. I know you're looking for answers, and I wish I had better ones to give you. What I can tell you is that we're dealing with something unprecedented in this region. She gestured to Dr. Chen, who stepped forward with her tablet in hand. Dr. Chen from the State University has been tracking these attacks across 4 counties. Sarah? Thank you, Sheriff. What we're dealing with appears to be a pack of large hybrid canines, part wolf, part domestic dog. They're displaying coordinated hunting behavior that suggests a high level of intelligence and social organization. Dr. Chen pulled up the digital map I'd seen the night before, now projected on a large screen behind her. The pattern of attacks is systematic, moving in a roughly circular pattern with Cedar Ridge at the center. A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Tom Fletcher, who owned one of the larger ranches in the area, stood up. Doc Chen, how many of these things are we talking about? Our best estimate is 4 to 6 animals, possibly more. They're significantly larger than normal wolves. Some of the tracks we've cast suggest animals weighing between 120 and 150 pounds. The man I didn't recognize stepped forward then. I'm Captain James Morrison, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. I've been brought in to coordinate the state response to this situation. His tone was professional but carried an undertone of concern that wasn't reassuring. I want to be clear about the seriousness of what we're facing. In my 23 years with the department, I've never encountered predator behavior quite like this. What do you mean? Asked Linda Martinez, who ran the town's only grocery store and had 3 young children. Normal predator attacks are driven by hunger or territorial defense. These attacks appear to be systematic, almost strategic. The animals are testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. That suggests a level of intelligence that goes beyond typical wildlife behavior. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the calculating way the creatures had studied us from the tree line, and how Thunder had responded not with the panic of prey, but with the deliberate courage of a protector. What's the plan? This came from Bill Henderson, whose ranch had been one of the first hit. Captain Morrison exchanged a glance with Sheriff Knowles before answering. We're implementing a coordinated response. All livestock should be brought in close to buildings after dark. We're setting up motion-activated cameras at the perimeter of town and asking everyone to report any unusual animal activity immediately. Additionally, we're organizing armed patrols of the area. And if these patrols encounter the pack? Asked Dr. Patterson, who ran the town's small medical clinic. Our primary objective is to track and tranquilize the animals for relocation. However, Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. If public safety is threatened, we're authorized to use lethal force. The meeting continued for another hour, with Captain Morrison outlining safety protocols and Sheriff Knowles organizing volunteer patrols. But I found my attention drifting to Thunder, who I could see through the gymnasium windows. He was in the trailer, but his body language suggested the same heightened alertness I'd observed at the ranch. His head was turned toward the forest line beyond the school parking lot, ears rotating constantly. As the meeting broke up, I was approached by Father Rodriguez from St. Mary's Catholic Church, a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd ministered to our community for over 20 years. Dr. Mitchell, I was wondering if I could speak with you privately for a moment. We stepped outside into the cool evening air, where Thunder immediately whinnied softly at my approach. What's on your mind, Father? It's probably nothing, but I've been hearing things. Old-timers talking about legends, stories passed down from their grandparents about the early days of settlement here. He looked embarrassed, as if he was violating his rational, educated worldview by even mentioning such things. Stories about guardian spirits, about the land protecting itself when threatened. Father, I'm not sure I follow. Your horse, Dr. Mitchell. The way he behaved last night at your ranch, Mrs. Henderson saw it from their property. She said it was like watching an old western. A cavalry horse defending his position. He paused, studying Thunder through the trailer slats. Animals sometimes know things we don't. Sometimes they sense things that our scientific instruments can't detect. Before I could respond, Thunder's head snapped toward the forest line, and he began that low, rumbling sound I'd heard the night before. Within seconds, every dog in the vicinity began barking, and the conversations in the parking lot gradually died as people became aware of the tension in the air. They're out there, I said quietly, following Thunder's gaze. They're watching us right now. Father Rodriguez crossed himself. God help us all. The drive home was tense, with Thunder restless in the trailer and my eyes constantly checking the tree lines on both sides of the road. When we arrived at the ranch, I made another decision that would prove crucial in the days to come. Instead of putting Thunder in the barn or even the near pasture, I set up a temporary corral in the yard directly behind the house, where he could see all approaches to our property. That night, as I sat on the porch with a loaded rifle across my lap, something I'd never imagined doing in my entire life, I watched Thunder patrol his small enclosure with military precision. Every 15 minutes he would complete a circuit of the fence line, pausing at each corner to test the air and listen to sounds I couldn't hear. At 2:30 a.m., he suddenly stopped dead center in the corral and faced northeast, toward the section of forest where the attacks had been occurring. For a full minute, he remained perfectly still except for the slight movement of his nostrils as he processed scents carried on the night breeze. Then he did something that still gives me chills to remember. He walked to the fence closest to the house and looked directly at me, making eye contact in a way that felt almost human in its intentionality. The message was unmistakable. They're coming. Get ready. I called Sheriff Knowles immediately. Patricia, they're moving toward town. Thunder's picked up their scent, and he's never wrong about these things. How can you be sure? Because in 3 years, he's never been wrong about anything that mattered. You need to alert the patrols. 20 minutes later, I heard the distant crack of rifle fire from the direction of town, followed by the wail of sirens. Patricia called back at 3:15. They hit the Martinez place on the edge of town, killed their dog, and tried to get into the chicken coop before the patrol scared them off. No human casualties, but Doc, your horse called it exactly right. How is that possible? As I looked out at Thunder, now standing calmly in his corral as if satisfied that the immediate threat had passed, I realized we were dealing with something far beyond what any of us had imagined. The bond between Thunder and me had evolved into something approaching partnership in the truest sense, a collaboration between two different species facing a common threat. But what none of us could have foreseen was how that partnership would soon be tested in ways that would transform Thunder from protector to legend and cost him everything he had to give. The attacks escalated over the next week with a precision that chilled everyone in Cedar Ridge to the bone. What had started as seemingly random predation had evolved into something that felt almost like psychological warfare. The pack, which we'd now confirmed consisted of 6 massive hybrid creatures, had begun targeting the community's sense of security with surgical precision. On Monday night, they destroyed the playground equipment at Cedar Ridge Elementary, leaving behind massive claw marks that served no purpose except to send a message. On Wednesday, they systematically killed every chicken at the Yamamoto farm, while leaving the coop doors intact, a level of dexterity that defied everything we thought we knew about wolf behavior. By Friday, parents were driving their children to and from school in armed convoys, and the town that had once felt like Mayberry now resembled something from a war zone. Through it all, Thunder had become my early warning system and, increasingly, my lifeline to sanity. His ability to predict the pack's movements had proven unnaturally accurate. Every attack, every sighting, every close call, Thunder sensed them all hours before they occurred, his behavior shifting from calm vigilance to active alarm with clockwork precision. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to talk." Sheriff Knowles stood at my kitchen table, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of strain. She'd aged visibly in the past week, the weight of protecting a terrified community etched in the lines around her eyes. "Captain Morrison thinks we should evacuate the town." I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Evacuate? Patricia, this is people's homes, their livelihoods, their lives, Doc. That's what we're talking about here." She pulled out a folder filled with photographs that I immediately wished I hadn't seen. "This is what they did to the Henderson's bull last night. 600 pounds of prize Angus, and they took it down like it was nothing. But that's not the worst part." She handed me a photo that made my stomach turn. The massive bull hadn't just been killed, it had been arranged, positioned in a way that was clearly intended as a message. The precision of the wounds, the deliberate nature of the display, it all pointed to intelligence that was becoming impossible to deny. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "It gets worse." Dr. Chen ran tests on the saliva samples we've collected. The genetic markers indicate these aren't just wolf-dog hybrids. There's something else in the mix, something she can't identify, something that shouldn't exist in nature. Thunder's sharp whinny from outside interrupted our conversation. I looked through the kitchen window to see him standing alert in his corral, but this time his posture was different. Instead of the defensive stance I'd grown accustomed to, he appeared to be listening to something far in the distance. "What is it, boy?" I called through the open window. His response was immediate and unlike anything I'd heard from him before. A long, clear call that seemed to carry across the valley like a war horn. Within moments I could hear answers coming from the direction of town. Horses calling back from ranches throughout the area, their voices joining Thunder's in what sounded almost like communication. "What the hell was that?" Patricia asked, moving to the window beside me. "I don't know, but I've never heard Thunder make that sound before." As I watched, Thunder completed his call and then moved to the corner of his corral that faced town, as if positioning himself for something specific. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Captain Morrison, and his voice carried a tension I hadn't heard before. "Dr. Mitchell, we need you and Thunder in town immediately. We've got a situation developing that's unlike anything we've dealt with so far." The drive into Cedar Ridge was surreal. As we passed ranch after ranch, I could see horses in pastures and corrals throughout the valley, all of them displaying the same alert posture that Thunder had shown. They were all facing the same direction, toward the forest line that bordered the eastern edge of town. "It's like they're responding to some kind of signal," I told Patricia as we pulled into the parking lot behind the sheriff's station. "But what kind of signal could reach horses across a 10-mile radius?" Thunder's behavior in the trailer had been unprecedented during the drive. Instead of his usual calm acceptance of transport, he'd been restless, shifting his weight and occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost conversational. When I let him out of the trailer, he immediately oriented himself toward the forest and began that systematic testing of the air that had become his signature response to the pack's presence. But this time was different. This time, Thunder's entire demeanor suggested anticipation rather than alarm. Captain Morrison met us in the parking lot, flanked by Dr. Chen and a woman I didn't recognize, tall, Native American, probably in her 50s, with the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Dr. Maria Crow Feather, professor of animal behavior at Montana State and a member of the Crow Nation. She's been consulting with us on some of the more unusual aspects of this situation." Dr. Crow Feather approached Thunder slowly, her movements deliberate and respectful. To my amazement, Thunder, who was usually cautious around strangers, allowed her to come within arm's reach without showing any signs of tension. "Your horse has been calling to the others," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of generations rooted in this land. In traditional stories, this is what happens when the natural world prepares to defend itself against an unnatural threat. Dr. Crowfeather, with all due respect, we're dealing with a very real, very physical threat here, Captain Morrison said. "I'm not sure how traditional stories—" "Captain," she interrupted gently, "I have a PhD in animal behavior from Stanford and 30 years of field research experience. When I reference traditional stories, I'm not talking about folklore. I'm talking about behavioral patterns that have been observed and recorded for centuries." She turned back to Thunder, who was now watching her with what I could only describe as recognition. "Your horse is preparing for something. They all are. The question is, are we prepared to listen?" Before anyone could respond, the radio on Captain Morrison's belt crackled to life. "Captain, this is Patrol 7. We've got movement in the forest, lots of movement. And sir, it's not just the pack anymore." The blood drained from Morrison's face. "Explain." "Sir, we're seeing deer, elk, even what looks like a mountain lion moving toward the pack's territory. It's like every predator and prey animal in the region is converging on the same location." Dr. Crowfeather nodded grimly. "It's starting." "What's starting?" I demanded. "The natural world is preparing to restore balance. Your horse has been chosen as the messenger, the one who will coordinate the response." She looked directly at Thunder, who seemed to meet her gaze with understanding. "But Dr. Mitchell, you need to understand something. In all the traditional accounts of such events, the messenger always pays the highest price." Thunder suddenly stepped forward, pressing his massive head against my chest in the gesture that had become our most intimate form of communication. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like goodbye. "No," I said, backing away from both Thunder and Dr. Crowfeather. "Whatever you think is going to happen, we're not participating. Thunder is not some mythical sacrifice. He's my partner, my friend, my—" Thunder's response cut through my protest like a blade. He looked directly into my eyes, and for one impossible moment, I could have sworn I saw not just intelligence, but intention, purpose, and something that looked remarkably like peace. Then he turned away from me and began walking toward the forest. "Thunder, stop," I called, but he continued moving with that steady, determined gait I'd seen him use when patrolling the ranch perimeter. "Let him go," Dr. Crowfeather said softly. "This is his choice to make." "Like hell it is." I started after him, but Captain Morrison caught my arm. "Dr. Mitchell, wait, look." I followed his gaze and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. All along the tree line, animals were emerging from the forest. Deer, elk, even a massive grizzly bear that should have been in hibernation. They weren't running from something. They were gathering, organizing, preparing for something that my rational mind couldn't begin to process. And at the center of it all, Thunder walked forward with the calm certainty of a soldier reporting for duty. What I witnessed in the next hour would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world, about courage, and about the depth of love that can exist between two different species. What I witnessed over the next 3 hours defied every law of nature I'd learned in veterinary school. From my position behind the police barriers that Captain Morrison had hastily erected, I watched as Thunder became the focal point of the most extraordinary gathering of wildlife I'd ever seen. It started with the deer, dozens of white-tailed and mule deer emerging from the forest in organized groups, their usual skittish behavior replaced by purpose that seemed almost military in its precision. Then came the elk, massive bulls with antler spreads that could span 6 feet, leading smaller groups of cows and calves. A family of black bears emerged from the undergrowth, followed by what I counted as at least 20 coyotes moving in formation. But it was the mountain lions that made my blood run cold. 3 of them, including one massive tom that probably weighed close to 200 pounds, padding silently through the gathering with the fluid grace of professional predators. In the natural world, these animals should have been scattering in terror from each other. Instead, they were organizing around Thunder as if responding to commands I couldn't hear. "This is impossible, Doctor," Chen whispered beside me, her scientific training warring with the evidence of her own eyes. "Interspecies cooperation on this scale simply doesn't happen. The stress hormones alone should have triggered massive flight responses." Dr. Crowfeather stood quietly observing, making occasional notes in a leather journal that looked like it had seen decades of use. "It happens," she said calmly. "Just not in recent memory. The last documented gathering like this was in 1889, when the Yellowstone Pack threatened the entire ecosystem." "The Yellowstone Pack?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "Unnatural wolves, bred for size and aggression by settlers who wanted to create the ultimate hunting companions. They escaped, grew in numbers, and began systematically destroying the natural balance. It took the combined effort of every species in the region to drive them out. Thunder had positioned himself at the edge of the tree line, where he could see both the gathering wildlife and our human encampment. Every few minutes he would make that distinctive call I'd heard earlier, and various groups of animals would shift position in response. It was like watching a general deploy troops for battle. "How does he know what to do?" I asked, directing the question to anyone who might have an answer. "Genetic memory," Dr. Crowfeather replied. "Some behaviors are so fundamental to survival that they become encoded in DNA, passed down through generations even when they're not actively used. Your horse is accessing knowledge that's probably been dormant in his bloodline for over a century." The radio crackled again. "Captain, this is Observation Post 3. The pack is moving. All 6 of them, heading directly toward the gathering point. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. Morrison immediately began coordinating his human forces. 12 officers from various agencies, all armed with both lethal and non-lethal options. But as I watched the massive assembly of wildlife preparing for confrontation, I realized our contribution to whatever was about to happen would be minimal at best. "Dr. Mitchell," Patricia appeared at my elbow, her face grim. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." "What is it?" "If this goes badly, if Thunder is injured or—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood what she was asking. "If Thunder dies, will I blame you? Will I blame the town? Will I sue everyone involved for not stopping him?" I looked across the gathering dusk toward my partner, who was now surrounded by creatures that should have been natural enemies but were instead treating him with something approaching reverence. "Patricia, you couldn't stop him with a tank. This is who he is. This is who he's always been. I just never understood it before." As if he'd heard our conversation, Thunder turned toward our position and looked directly at me. For the 3rd time in our partnership, we made that deep eye contact that transcended species boundaries. This time, what I saw in his gaze was gratitude, affection, and an unmistakable request for trust. I nodded to him, a simple gesture that somehow communicated everything I couldn't say aloud. "I trust you. I believe in you. And whatever happens next, you have my blessing." Thunder's response was a soft, nickering sound that I'd learned was his expression of contentment. Then he turned back toward the forest and began what I can only describe as the final preparations for war. The hybrid pack appeared at the forest edge exactly 28 minutes later, and their presence immediately transformed the atmosphere from tense anticipation to electric danger. They moved in perfect formation, 2 scouts in front, the main group behind, with the largest animal I'd ever seen bringing up the rear. That alpha hybrid was a creature that seemed to belong in a nightmare rather than the Montana wilderness. Easily 4 feet tall at the shoulder, with a coat that appeared almost black in the fading light, it carried itself with the confidence of an apex predator that had never encountered serious opposition. Its eyes, reflecting the portable lights we'd set up, showed an intelligence that was definitely not entirely animal. "Jesus," Captain Morrison breathed. "That thing has to weigh over 200 pounds. The confrontation began with what Dr. Crowfeather later described as a challenge protocol, a ritualized display of dominance that she said was common in tribal warfare. The alpha hybrid stepped forward and released a howl that seemed to shake the ground beneath our feet. It was answered immediately by Thunder's clear, trumpet-like call, which was then echoed by every animal in the gathering. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the 2 forces faced each other across perhaps 50 yards of meadow grass. Hybrid wolves that represented everything unnatural and destructive about human interference with evolution, opposed by a coalition of native species that had coexisted in this valley for thousands of years. Then the alpha hybrid made its decision. With a snarl that carried across the night air like a war cry, it charged directly toward Thunder. What happened next unfolded with the terrible beauty of forces far beyond human control. Thunder didn't retreat or attempt to escape. Instead, he reared up on his hind legs just as he had that first night at my ranch, his massive frame silhouetted against the star-filled Montana sky. But this time, When his hooves struck the ground, he charged forward to meet his opponent head-on. The impact when they collided was audible from our position nearly 100 yards away. A sound like thunder itself, like the earth splitting apart. For a moment, both animals disappeared in a cloud of dust and flying debris. When it cleared, Thunder was standing over the motionless form of the alpha hybrid, his head high, his breathing labored but controlled. The remaining 5 pack members hesitated for perhaps 3 seconds. Then they attacked as a unit, moving with coordinated precision toward Thunder's position. And that's when the true battle began. What followed would be remembered in Cedar Ridge for generations to come, not just as the night our community was saved, but as the night we witnessed the birth of a legend that would outlive us all. The battle that followed lasted only 17 minutes, but those minutes contained a lifetime of courage, sacrifice, and transformation that burned itself into my memory with the intensity of a brand. I've replayed every second countless times trying to understand how one horse, my Thunder, could have orchestrated something so magnificent and terrible. When the 5 remaining pack members charged Thunder's position, the assembled wildlife moved with precision that suggested months of planning rather than instinctive response. The mountain lions struck first, their powerful forms launching from concealment to intercept the hybrids closest to Thunder's flanks. The grizzly bear emerged from behind a cluster of pine trees like a force of nature itself, engaging the largest of the remaining pack members with a roar that seemed to shake the mountains. But it was Thunder who remained the focal point of the battle, the stable center around which all other action revolved. He fought with a combination of power and intelligence that transcended everything I thought I knew about equine behavior. When a hybrid attempted to attack his left side, Thunder pivoted with ballet-like grace and delivered a kick that sent the creature flying nearly 15 feet. When another tried to leap for his throat, Thunder reared and brought his front hooves down with the force of sledgehammers. "My God," Dr. Chen whispered beside me. "He's not just fighting. He's commanding the entire engagement." She was right. Between his own defensive actions, Thunder continued to call out instructions, sharp, clear notes that directed other animals to specific positions. When a coyote pack seemed confused about their role, Thunder's brief whinny sent them circling around to cut off the hybrid's retreat route. When the elk appeared to be holding back, Thunder's deeper call brought them charging forward to support the mountain lions. For 12 incredible minutes, it appeared that Thunder's coalition would achieve the impossible, driving off or destroying the hybrid pack without losing a single member of their own forces. The natural balance, the ancient order of things, seemed to be reasserting itself through sheer coordinated will. Then the alpha hybrid, the creature I'd thought Thunder had killed, stirred to life behind him. The massive hybrid had been stunned, not killed, by Thunder's initial attack. As Thunder coordinated the battle against the remaining pack members, the alpha slowly regained consciousness and began stalking toward my horse's exposed back. "Thunder, behind you!" I screamed, though I knew he couldn't hear me over the sounds of battle. Dr. Crowfeather caught my arm as I started to climb over the police barrier. "You can't help him," she said gently. "This is his moment, his choice. Don't take that away from him." Thunder seemed to sense the approaching danger without turning around. His entire posture shifted subtly, and I realized he was making a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Instead of turning to defend himself against the alpha hybrid, Thunder made one final, powerful call that sent every other animal in the coalition racing away from the battle zone. He was clearing the field. He was accepting a one-on-one confrontation that he couldn't possibly win in order to ensure that no other creature would be harmed. The alpha hybrid's final attack was swift and terrible. The creature launched itself at Thunder's back with claws extended and jaws open, its massive weight driving Thunder to his knees. For a moment, I couldn't see anything through the cloud of dust and debris kicked up by their struggle. When the dust settled, both animals lay motionless on the meadow grass. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. No bird calls, no insect sounds, no wind through the trees, as if the entire natural world was holding its breath. Then, slowly, Thunder raised his head. He was badly injured. I could see that even from our distant position. Dark stains covered his left flank where the hybrid's claws had found their mark, and his movements were labored, painful. But he was alive, and the alpha hybrid beneath him was not. Thunder struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but maintaining his balance through sheer force of will. Then he did something that brought tears to my eyes and convinced me once and for all that I was witnessing something far beyond ordinary animal behavior. He looked directly toward our position, toward me, and whinnied softly. It was the same sound he made every morning when I brought him breakfast, the same gentle greeting that had become part of our daily ritual. Even in his moment of triumph, even wounded and exhausted, Thunder was telling me that everything was all right. The remaining pack members, seeing their alpha defeated, vanished into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. The coalition of wildlife that Thunder had assembled began dispersing as well, but not before something extraordinary happened. One by one, they approached Thunder's position. The grizzly bear brushed against his shoulder with surprising gentleness. The mountain lions rubbed their heads against his legs in the manner of domestic cats seeking affection. The deer touched their noses to his neck. Even the coyotes approached to offer their respect to the horse who had led them to victory. It was a farewell ceremony, I realized. They knew, as I was beginning to understand, that Thunder had given everything he had to give. Captain Morrison was already on his radio, calling for a veterinary medical team, but I knew with cold certainty that we were beyond the reach of medical intervention. Thunder's wounds were severe, but more than that, I could see in his posture the profound exhaustion of a soul that had completed its mission. When the police barriers were finally moved and I was allowed to approach, Thunder was lying on his side in the meadow grass, breathing slowly but peacefully. The moon had risen while we weren't watching, and its light turned his dark coat silver and made the white blaze on his face shine like starlight. I knelt beside him and placed my hand on his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palm. His eyes were clear and calm, focused on my face with that deep intelligence that had always set him apart. "I'm here, boy," I whispered. "I'm right here." Thunder made one final sound, not a whinny of pain or distress, but something that sounded remarkably like contentment. Then his eyes closed, and the greatest heart I've ever known beat its last beat. Dr. Crowfeather appeared beside me as I sat in the moonlit meadow, holding the head of my best friend. "In the old stories," she said softly, "when a horse gives his life to protect his people, he doesn't really die. He becomes part of the land itself, part of the balance he died to preserve." I wanted to tell her that those were just stories, just comforting words meant to ease the pain of loss. But as I sat there with Thunder's still form beneath the vast Montana sky, I felt something I couldn't rationally explain. The wind through the grass sounded different. The moonlight seemed brighter. The very air felt charged with a presence that was both familiar and eternal. Thunder was gone, but somehow Thunder would always be here. But the true measure of Thunder's sacrifice wouldn't become clear until the days that followed, when the entire community of Cedar Ridge began to understand that we had witnessed not just the death of a brave horse, but the birth of something far greater. Chapter 7. The Legacy That Lives Forever. 3 months have passed since that October night, and I'm writing this from the covered porch of my ranch, looking out over the meadow where Thunder made his final stand. The physical evidence of the battle has long since disappeared. The disturbed earth has been smoothed by winter rains, the blood has washed away, and new grass will grow in the spring. But the story of what happened here has taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond the boundaries of Cedar Ridge in ways that continue to amaze me. The immediate aftermath was surreal. Word of Thunder's sacrifice spread through social media faster than wildfire, shared and reshared by people who had never heard of Cedar Ridge, Montana, but who recognized something universal in the story of a horse who gave everything to protect his community. News crews arrived from as far away as New York and Los Angeles, all wanting to interview the veterinarian whose horse had become an overnight legend. But it was the local response that truly honored Thunder's memory. Within a week of his death, the Cedar Ridge Town Council had voted unanimously to establish Thunder Memorial Park on the exact spot where he fell. Donations poured in from around the country, enough not just to create a beautiful memorial, but to fund a wildlife conservation program that ensures the natural balance Thunder died to protect will be maintained for generations to come. Dr. Sarah Chen submitted her research on the hybrid pack to multiple scientific journals, and her findings sparked a revolution in how we understand animal intelligence and interspecies cooperation. The footage captured by the state wildlife cameras has been studied by behavioral scientists around the world, providing evidence for theories about genetic memory and instinctive coordination that were previously considered impossible. Dr. Maria Crowfeather has been invited to speak at universities across the country about the intersection of traditional ecological knowledge and modern science. Her documentation of the events has become required reading in environmental studies programs, and she tells me that Thunder's story has helped bridge the gap between indigenous wisdom and academic research in ways that seemed impossible just a few months ago. But perhaps most importantly, the hybrid pack never returned. The few surviving members scattered to remote areas where they pose no threat to human communities, and subsequent tracking has shown no evidence of organized predatory behavior. Whatever unnatural intelligence had driven their coordinated attacks died with their alpha that night in the meadow. I've thought often about Dr. Crowfeather's words regarding Thunder becoming part of the land itself. At first I dismissed this as poetic metaphor, a kind way of helping me process grief that threatened to overwhelm me in those first weeks after his death. But as winter settled over the valley, and I began the process of learning to live without my daily companion, I started noticing things that challenged my scientific skepticism. The wildlife in our area has remained unusually calm and well-organized. Predator-prey relationships have settled into patterns that suggest unusual harmony. Livestock attacks have dropped to essentially zero, not just in Cedar Ridge but throughout the four-county area where the hybrids had been active. It's as if Thunder's final act somehow reset the natural balance to a healthier state than any of us can remember. More personally, I've found a peace I didn't expect. The crushing grief I anticipated never fully materialized. Instead, I've been left with a profound sense of gratitude for the 3 years Thunder and I shared, and an equally profound certainty that those years changed me in ways that will last the rest of my life. I've received thousands of letters from people around the world sharing their own stories of animal companions who displayed extraordinary courage, loyalty, and love. Horse owners, dog lovers, cat enthusiasts, even people whose lives were touched by wildlife encounters. All of them recognizing something universal in Thunder's story that transcends species boundaries. Last month I was contacted by a publisher interested in turning Thunder's story into a children's book series that would teach young people about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of protecting the natural world. I've agreed to the project, with all proceeds going to the Thunder Memorial Wildlife Fund that the town established. But the most meaningful tribute to Thunder's legacy came just last week, when a young family from California visited Cedar Ridge, specifically to see Thunder Memorial Park. Their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, had followed Thunder's story online and convinced her parents to drive all the way to Montana so she could lay flowers at his memorial. As I watched Emma kneel beside the bronze statue that captures Thunder mid-rear, positioned eternally between the town and the forest in a pose of protection and defiance, I heard her whisper something that brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for being brave," she said. "Thank you for saving everyone." Standing there in the afternoon sunlight, watching a child thank my horse for a sacrifice she could only understand through the lens of pure heart, I finally grasped the full magnitude of what Thunder had achieved. He hadn't just saved Cedar Ridge from a pack of rogue predators. He had created a story, a living example of what's possible when love conquers fear, when courage transcends self-preservation, when the bond between species becomes strong enough to move mountains. Tomorrow, I'm picking up a new horse, a 3-year-old quarter horse named Hope that I'm adopting from the same rescue where I found Thunder. I'm not looking for a replacement. Thunder can never be replaced. But I've learned that the best way to honor his memory is to continue the work of building bridges between the human and animal worlds. Will Hope have Thunder's extraordinary gifts? Almost certainly not. Thunder was once in a lifetime rare, a horse whose combination of intelligence, courage, and heart created something approaching magic. But Hope will be herself, with her own personality and her own ways of seeing the world, and I'm looking forward to discovering what our partnership will become. As I finish writing this final chapter of Thunder's story, the sun is setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that seem designed specifically for Montana. A gentle breeze carries the scent of pine and grass and the promise of spring, and somewhere in the distance I can hear the soft nickering of horses settling in for the night. For just a moment I could swear one of those voices sounds familiar, a deep, resonant call that speaks of protection, partnership, and a love that transcends the boundaries between life and death. But perhaps that's just my imagination, or perhaps Dr. Crowfeather was right about horses who give everything to protect their people becoming part of the land itself. Either way, I know with absolute certainty that Thunder's story isn't ending. It's just beginning. Every person who hears about his sacrifice, every child who learns that love is stronger than fear, every animal lover who looks at their companion and sees not just a pet, but a partner capable of extraordinary things, All of them carry Thunder's legacy forward into a future where the bond between humans and animals grows stronger, rather than weaker. In a world that often seems divided by differences we can't bridge, Thunder proved that love recognizes no boundaries. In a time when many people have lost faith in heroism, Thunder showed us that heroes come in all forms, and that the greatest heroes are often those who ask for nothing except the chance to protect what they love. And in a place that could have been consumed by fear, Thunder chose courage, and in choosing courage he transformed not just his own story, but the story of everyone whose life he touched. That transformation is his true monument, more lasting than bronze and more powerful than stone. It lives in every act of kindness between species, every moment of understanding between human and animal, every instance where love proves stronger than fear. Thunder may be gone, but Thunder is eternal, and that makes all the difference in the world. In memory of all the animal companions who have given everything to protect those they love, and in honor of the unbreakable bonds that unite us across species, Thunder's story reminds us that love knows no boundaries, courage comes in all forms, and legends are born not from perfection, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for those who matter most.